In truth, our team is like 13 or 14 people, so instead they're just a cheering crowd, making sure there's people here. So, oh, do I have a clicker? Does that work? Perfect. So the first thing that we started with was really considering what creative thinking is. First thoughts, maybe art, music, or dance. But as we really started to dig in, we saw maybe it really was the invention of the airplane. What about Einstein's theory of relativity, or the failure that turned into the Post-it note? Could these also be examples of creative thinking? So what became clear was that we needed to understand what creative thinking was, and as a result, our question was to explore how we can improve our students' ability to think creatively in many, many different areas. So that led us to wonder, what can we do to move our practice forward and help our students be successful in being creative thinkers? The first thing that we did was a book study. So we read Creating Thinking Classrooms by Garfield, Ginny Newman, and Roland Case. It took us a while and we worked through it, but what we realized was that thinking creatively was really critical to using knowledge meaningfully. Our goal was to teach kids to think and develop their ideas rather than just relying on absolutely knowing everything. What we learned from the book was that there's kind of two areas of creative thinking. There's the big C, the big creative thinking moments, like the theory of relativity. But more often we see the small C's, the small moments of creative thinking, like how to tie your shoe when your shoelace breaks. So once we figured out what creative thinking was, we wanted to dive in. How are we going to share this with students? Well, the first connection we made was to the BC Ed Plan and understanding the creative thinking competency. So with 10 out of our 11 classroom teachers on our IBLT, along with our LSS teacher, our PE teacher, and our principal, getting together in one space for an extended period of time was a little bit tricky. So we got a little bit creative and spent a night at Harrison so we could have 2 full days to really look at what creative thinking is. After dissecting it and pulling it apart and working with it, we settled on these 5 learning targets to help us understand what creative thinking is, to make something really abstract more visible and concrete. What we saw was that we were probably able to understand these, hopefully students would as well. So to put them to the test, the IBLT engaged in their own STEM challenges. We went through 2 or 3 over the weekend, and the focus was to think about those targets. How are those targets helping us think creatively? The focus was on the thinking, not the end result, although it did get a little competitive. The staff in the end felt that their creative thinking had improved and their understanding of creative thinking had also improved. We saw that these targets would probably help us meet the goals to teach kids to think and develop their ideas rather than just relying on knowing. We also saw that these learning targets could easily be woven into all different subject areas. So we wanted to expose our students to the core competencies, which we'd worked through over the past few years, but we needed to update creative thinking. So we shared the new targets with students, and in order to have them really understand what we were asking them to do and how we were asking them to think, we had them do similar STEM challenges to what we had done. So she really was more happy than that, but things like the marshmallow challenge, building a structure to support a bucket of pennies, or stacking cups as high as they could go. These challenges were all differentiated from K all the way to 5. What we saw was that creative thinking in action helps make it more concrete, and students were able to self-assess how they were doing when it came to thinking creatively. We started to gather evidence of creative thinking on a daily basis. So students started to write out cards and share ideas about where they'd seen creative thinking in their everyday life. As we started to collect them, we saw that lots of these moments were the small C moments, or the little creative thinking moments that would happen throughout the day. It made it really tangible and more concrete. Teachers also started pointing out more often what students were doing that show creative thinking, and we started to integrate it into our subject areas. I could give you 100 examples as to what happened in classrooms around creative thinking, and these are just a few. In one of our K1 classrooms, the class was engaged in an inquiry about community, and so creative thinking was really valued when students had to create a living space for a pet. They were building on the ideas of others, they were developing their ideas, they had to work to find out more to come up with ideas to make a safe space for their pet to live. In math, students were making connections to come up with ideas about how to use a personal strategy to solve math equations, relying on what they learned about numbers, what do they just know about numbers they could use. In higher grades, students were connecting skip counting to multiplication. My class is currently planning a mini fun fair for their K1 buddies through some project-based learning experiences. They've had to use creative thinking to figure out what kinds of things do they want this experience to include. So they figured out games and food and prizes and even a petting zoo. One team has worked for over 4 or 5 sessions to build an elephant out of construction boxes that can stand. They spent so much time developing their idea, asking for feedback from friends, retrying, and retrying. We're seeing that throughout of our classrooms in everyday experiences, not just the ones that we're setting out intentionally, creative thinking is starting to blossom. So as a result, we've seen some pretty surprising changes. We're seeing that kids are willing to take more risks. We're seeing that they're way less frustrated when their ideas don't work as planned because they've been given permission to keep developing their ideas. They are seeing themselves as creative people because we've brought it outside of the art realm. We're also seeing students problem solving independently, and they're way more willing to share their ideas, knowing that their idea may be built on by someone else as they continue to think. We're also having students self-assess. Many students in classes are self-assessing weekly now about creative thinking that they've experienced throughout the week, sometimes with the help of photos and a little bit of direction for younger grades. This is really making it concrete and less abstract. Next year, we plan to continue exploring creative thinking, but bringing in critical thinking. We've really seen how the two are interwoven, and by focusing on the thinking as opposed to the end product, we're seeing huge changes in just our students' ability to think and take risks. In conclusion, do we think that we've found the next great invention or the next great Post-it note? No. But we think that we've started to create a foundation for creative thinkers to continue to develop their understanding of coming up with an idea, to take risks, persevere, and maybe one day change the world.